Alright, I know it's been a pretty long time since I've done any kind of long-form content on this channel. I'm sorry that I was away from that for a while. The last few months have been hectic, to say the least. Here I thought coming into 2023, I was like, yeah, I've got my mental health under control, this is gonna be my year. And then as the year went on, everything just kinda got wild again. Well, that's life, I guess. Being an adult is hard, but, you know, working through it as best as I can. But I got some fun videos for you guys. It is end of year time, so that means there's gonna be some more fun content to come. And it seems like when I did this last year, you guys really enjoyed it, which is good news because I'm doing it again this year. Even though this series didn't really work out as well in an episodic format, doing it in a year-end style is pretty fun, which is why I'm more than glad to do it again. So, let's not waste any more time on this intro. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. I nearly forgot that that's how I start these videos off. It's been that long, and because I don't do these as consistently, I had kind of forgotten. Yeah, right, that's the 10 Years Later intro, isn't it? I'm glad it came back to me. But anyway, as you can tell from the title, today I want to talk about 2013. So, in case you forgot how last year's video went, just to give a bit of a sum up on how this is going to go, I'm going to introduce the year a little bit, talk about some things I noticed based on the albums I listened to. I'm going to get into my worst list, my best list, and then some other notable albums that didn't receive an awful or an excellent from me. Just records that kind of landed somewhere in between, but I thought were worth mentioning for one reason or another. So, 2013. As a naturally nostalgic person, it's a year I kind of love looking back on because on a personal level, it was a pretty good year for me. Actually, one of my favorite years looking back. I have a lot of fond memories from 2013. Just in my personal life. I'm not going to dive into a ton of them because that's not necessarily what this series is for, maybe a little bit, but if they don't tie to the music, then not really. But I will say that 2013 is when I started doing Let's Plays on my old gaming channel with my brother and my two friends. My brother and I had been doing Let's Plays for a bit beforehand, but 2013 was when our friends Dave and Kenny started coming along for the ride. And yeah, I remember that summer vacation. I had a lot of good memories hanging out with them, but also just doing other kinds of things in my life. That was a good time. The one thing I wasn't doing in 2013 though was paying attention to a lot of the new music that was coming out. Again, it was really just kind of like if it showed up on my doorstep, I'd kind of give it a cursory look, decide if I liked it or not, and then just move on. If I liked it, I'd continue listening to it. If not, whatever, on to the next thing. And because I didn't start listening to albums until I started reviewing them back in 2017, I naturally wasn't listening to a lot of albums that came out in 2013. And looking back at what I missed, man, what a year 2013 was for music. There was such an incredible helping of fantastic albums ranging across all different kinds of genres. I mean, hip-hop was continuing its rise in the mainstream with a lot of big albums. Pop was kind of slowly inching its way out of the whole electronic bandwagon that the first few years of the 2010s were on. There was still some stuff, sure, but popular artists were more willing to kind of throw it back in 2013. R&B remained amazing as it would tend to be, and rock saw some breakouts and some bands kind of changing their sound and going a little poppier, but in many cases sticking the landing pretty nicely. Much like last year, I basically did a stat count of all the ratings I would have given to every album that I listened to from 2013. Not all of those albums will be showing up in this video, just letting you guys know. But to give you guys a little frame of reference, I listened to 55 albums from 2013. Of those 55 albums, 21 of them got an excellent rating from me. 4 of them got a great rating, 7 got a good, 9 got an okay rating, 1 got a bad rating, 6 got awful ratings, and 7 got a rating that was landing in the indifferent or not for me tiers. So essentially some facsimile of eh. So for those keeping score at home, that means that 38% of the albums I listened to from 2013 were excellent on my scale, while about 58% of them were at the very least good. For comparison, when revisiting 2012 last year, roughly 31% of the albums that I listened to were at least good. So yeah, it was very exciting compared to 2012. I remember last year, despite there being some fantastic 2012 albums that I got to return to, like Good Kid, Mad City or Channel Orange, there wasn't quite as much. It felt like it was a bit of a slower year, especially compared to something like 2011. But 2013 was loaded with great albums. Meanwhile, 2012 had a lot of albums that I'd either consider okay or indifferent or not for me, or some facsimile of eh. Last year, 49% of the albums I listened to were some modicum of eh. This year, the eh stuff only accounted for about 29% of what I listened to, and even then, a couple of the 2013 albums I would classify as okay are pretty well liked and are pretty notable compared to some of the 2012 albums that I thought were just eh. So yeah, in general, 2013 was a very exciting year to go back to for albums. But of course, there were some records that I found to be pretty rough, and like I said, I'm gonna start with those. We're gonna start with my least favorite albums from 2013, and there are 6 here. So let's get through some of these really bad albums first before we get to the good stuff. Starting off at the number 6 spot, we have Jason Derulo with Tattoos, Talk Dirty. I don't know, I think it came out under both names. Let's just call it Talk Dirty. You know what's the weird thing? Back in 2013, 2014, when I was still kind of in my pop cynic phase, and I wasn't really into a lot of the popular music that was showing up on the radio, Jason Derulo was one of the artists that I actually liked. Look, we all have things we're embarrassed about. But yeah, going back to this album for this series, it's pretty bad. A lot of annoying popular music tropes are on display here, and Jason himself often sounds pretty silly as a vocalist, and the writing is just garbage. There are honestly 1 or 2 okay highlights, but the lows are utterly terrible. I mean, Wiggle is one of the worst hits of the 2010s in my opinion, and I can't believe there was a time where I once liked songs like Talk Dirty or Trumpets. Just unfortunately a really bad project. At number 5, one I feel kind of bad ranking on this side of the list, but unfortunately I really didn't enjoy it very much. I gotta go with Britney Spears' 2013 album, Britney Jean. Again, it kinda hurts to put Britney on a worse list, especially given everything that she's gone through, but unfortunately, I just really don't like this album. Though for the most part, I don't really blame Britney as heavily for its quality. I think the producers really messed with the sound and her vocals on this one to the point where it didn't sound that flattering. Regardless though, this is an electronic pop train crash, and I personally think Work Bitch is more annoying than anything despite its incredible popularity. The bonus tracks nearly brought this thing from an awful to a bad, but I was too busy wondering why they weren't included on the base album since they were pretty much better than anything else there. Oh, and hearing Jamie Lynn on this album was weird, not only given the context of her role in Britney's conservatorship, but also, when did she forget how to sing? I mean, didn't she sing the iconic Zoe 101 theme song? What the hell happened? I don't know, but yeah, sadly, this album was pretty rough. Not quite as rough, though, as our number 4 album, which probably won't be a huge surprise, Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines. Yeah, this really shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, the track Blurred Lines is already hot garbage, one of the worst hit songs of the 2010s, and the rest of the album is just as bad. Even though some of the production is occasionally fun, it's all ruined by a guy who essentially sounds like a Justin Timberlake ripoff if JT was utterly repulsive and had no charm in his music. Granted, there are a lot of people who are repulsed by JT, but you know what I mean. Outside of maybe 2 songs, this album is a wreck, and I can't say I found much in it that no one else did. And I honestly think I can leave it at that. Moving on to our number 3 worst album, another one that shouldn't be too big a surprise, gotta go with DJ Khaled's Suffering From Success, the one that has the very memed cover art. Stop me if you've heard this before. DJ Khaled made a terrible album. Pfft, shocker. Fun fact, actually, DJ Khaled is technically the reason I initially canceled 10 Years Later as a series. At least in its original episodic form where I talked about the albums individually. I don't think I've ever really given the story, but just to give the story, last year when I listened to his 2012 album Kiss the Ring, I basically put it on, I was sitting there writing notes as I was listening to it, and then suddenly I just kind of got hit with a wave of just depression, and I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So if you're someone who misses when 10 Years Later was individual episodes, you can place the blame on DJ Khaled. There you go. And yeah, as much as I didn't want to do it anymore after listening to that album, This one is worse than that. I feel like I don't even need to explain why a DJ Khaled album is bad. The dude just kind of cares about bringing popular artists onto tracks to phone it in for the check while he screams a few times here and there, and that's kind of just what happens. And not much more needs to be said than that, so let's move on to a bad album that's at least a little more interesting. Because number 2 on the list, we have a pretty memorably bad album, Lil Wayne's I Am Not a Human Being 2. Lil Wayne has now landed on my least favorites list twice in the 2010s, as he previously topped the list in 2010 with Rebirth. And because of that, you might be surprised that he actually has albums from the 2010s that I quite like, the Carter 4 and 5 specifically. But yeah, this record was really bad. Very ordinary production, terrible hooks, and absolute garbage writing all throughout. It's sad that the most memorable part of this album for me was the best part of waking up is breakfast after a nut. And also, Soulja Boy drops maybe the worst rap verse that I've ever heard in my life, if you want to call that rapping. This is definitely one of Wayne's worst rap-focused albums since Rebirth is the rock album, and it's kind of in a league of its own. And the only reason I remotely care about this now is because of Dead End Hip Hop's review of it. Seriously, that review is a classic. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's incredible. Shout out to Dead End Hip Hop, they're amazing. But despite how bad this album is, it did not top the list because to me, the number 1 worst album that I listened to from 2013, my least favorite album of the year, gotta be will.i.am. #Willpower. I'm sure some people aren't surprised to see this album here, but yeah, it's incredibly bad. This record is everything that I don't miss about the popular music of the early 2010s. Every trope from that era that I didn't like is present here, only now it's stretched to its logical extreme. I don't know if will.i.am's goal was to basically murder the electronic dance pop craze and get everyone to stop making music in that style, but job well done if that was the goal. And also, thank you. I was getting pretty tired of that sound myself. And I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but I felt like I needed to take a shower after hearing Miley Cyrus rap on this album. But don't worry, more on that later. Yeah, this thing was really damn bad. And hopefully, now that I listen to it for this series, I never have to go back to it ever again. I would like to flush it and forget about it alongside the other bad albums that I just talked about. So instead, now that I have done that, now that we've flushed the bad out, let's get into my favorite albums of 2013. Even though I mentioned that there were 21 excellent ratings, there's only going to be 20 spots on this list because, much like last year's worst list when I combined Green Day's Uno Dos Tres at the top of the list, there is going to be a moment on this list where 2 albums take up 1 spot because I just grouped them together. You'll see when we get to that. So, starting off at the number 20 spot, I gotta go with A$AP Ferg's Trap Lord. What a banger of an album. A lot of bombastic production throughout, but A$AP Ferg makes up for his lyrical shortcomings with a contagious amount of energy on this record. It's not afraid to go buck wild, and Ferg is a very strong presence that can carry this record to success with plenty of great performances. There are a lot of bangers on here. Shaba is a pretty iconic track, and it's still fantastic to this day. And there are some great features too, like Bone Thugs-n-Harmony. Definitely lived up to the title. This record was awesome. At number 19, staying with the A$AP mob, I definitely gotta go with A$AP Rocky's Long Live A$AP. Long Live A$AP indeed. The debut album from the de facto leader of the A$AP mob, Long Live A$AP took the spacey vibes of Rocky's debut mixtape Live Love A$AP and added a bit more banging instrumentation to it, and it worked really well. There's a lot of varied and well-produced tracks all throughout, and the record is guided by Rocky himself being a great performer with an ear for fantastic instrumentals. I'll also say that it has probably one of my favorite hip-hop hit songs of the 2010s with Fucking Problems. That track is still amazing to this day. And yeah, as a debut album, this one is really damn good. Shout out to the A$AP mob. They were doing some really good stuff in 2013. At number 18, another big favorite artist of mine, Denzel Curry with Nostalgic 64. This was one of the few albums I listened to this year that wasn't available on my typical listening service, Spotify, and that's a shame because it's a damn good album. Very dark and very grim, and Denzel Curry is obviously a great performer, even back at this time when he was only 18 years old. And what's really wild about this album is that it feels like Denzel was barely scratching the surface here, and I think if you followed his career, you'd probably agree that he was barely scratching the surface. But yeah, this record felt like it was merely a hint at what we'd get from Zell on albums like Taboo, Zoo, and Melt My Eyes, See Your Future. But even if it was just a hint, It was a damn good hint, I'll say that much. I really hope this one comes to streaming services someday. It's a really fantastic album. At number 17, definitely gonna have to go with Mac Miller, Watching Movies with the Sound Off. To the surprise of no one, Mac Miller makes fantastic music. He's got a lot of albums that I like, but this one I really like. I really enjoyed the more abstract instrumentals that he went with on this project, along with his first big dip into more introspective songwriting, especially after his 2011 album Blue Slide Park. Also a very minor thing, but I think the track JayZ samples a Luigi's Mansion sound effect, and yeah, I love that. Sorry, I'm easy to please, I guess. But yeah, this is a great album, and it's really cool to see just how much Mac matured and grew as an artist on this record compared to his frat rap beginnings. And obviously, he'd continue to grow even more after this project. And as always, I gotta say it, R.I.P. Mac Miller. It still doesn't click with me sometimes that not only is he not here anymore, but that he hasn't been here for the last 5 years. R.I.P. Mac. At number 16, another very popular white rapper, definitely gotta go with Eminem's The Marshall Mathers LP2. It's probably not even a hot take to say that this is the best album that Eminem's put out since his 3-album peak of Slim Shady LP, Marshall Mathers LP1, and The Eminem Show. But nevertheless, I had to repeat it, and yeah, this album's awesome. It's basically the perfect combination of nice throwbacks, some solid emotional growth and maturity, and fewer of the corny moments that have plagued a lot of Eminem's post-peak output. A lot of big singles I still go back to from this thing, like Berserk and Rap God and Survival. A lot of iconic tracks that I really enjoyed back in 2013 and still enjoy now. In hindsight, this could have easily just been a nostalgia bait sequel to one of his most iconic records, but thankfully this thing still holds up well on its own. If you want an example of how good Eminem could be post-peak, this is the perfect example. At number 15, I was a little surprised at this at one point, but then I kind of remembered who I was talking about and how I felt about this group. Gotta go with Little Mix's 2013 album Salute. I shouldn't have been surprised that I enjoyed this so much because I enjoy Little Mix's last few albums, but after hearing their debut record last year, I'd kind of forgotten how good this group is. These girls can sing their asses off, but unlike that debut album, this is a moment where it felt like Psycho Music actually let the girls have some good production to work with, and at least like an ounce of creative freedom. And the result is a fantastically fun record that really shows off their talents and then some. How about that? 2013 was the year that Psycho Music actually decided to do something right, and there's more to that in just a bit. But until we get to that, yes, this is a fantastic record. I really enjoyed it a lot. At number 14, an album from a group I'm really coming to enjoy a lot more lately. I've enjoyed them before, but I'm really enjoying them now. I gotta go with Panic at the Disco's Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. This was Panic's last album as a group before becoming a solo project for lead singer Brendan Urie, and it's an album I really love. I know that Panic can be a bit love them or hate them for a lot of people, but for me, I think the group's typical bombast worked perfectly in a move to a more synth-pop style. I had a lot of fun listening to it, and I found it to be a fantastic follow-up to Vices and Virtues with plenty of bops on its own. I'm really becoming quite a fan of this group, even though I still want to forget that Viva Las Vengeance actually exists. Hey, at least this album makes it easier to do that. At number 13, I definitely gotta go with 21 Pilots' Vessel. I'm very on and off with this group, but when they're on, it is awesome. This record in particular is very twisty, and I love how much it changes genres and styles on a whim without sacrificing coherency in the process. This is definitely fantastic for a major label debut, and I find 21 Pilots to be at their best when they're not trying too hard to chase radio trends, and that's definitely what happens here. It may not be the most conceptual record the group's put out. I'd probably say that Trench belongs in that category, but this is still a damn good album, and I'm really happy that it still holds up so well after 10 years. At number 12, I gotta go with Childish Gambino's Because the Internet. Especially compared to Camp, which was an album that I already enjoyed, this is a fantastic growth for Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino. It's a super creative mix of hip-hop and R&B with some surprisingly dark and existential themes weaved in as well, the latter of which I wasn't initially expecting, but it kind of hit at the right time because as someone who late in the year went through a bit of an existential crisis, rather a quarter-life crisis, let's say, it was kind of one of those right place at the right time kind of albums. But yeah, this was definitely a huge improvement for Donald and one of his finest albums, and I'll also address this as well. I know that Gambino released a 72-page screenplay along with the album, and I was hearing a lot of takes of, you have to read the screenplay to appreciate the album. Honestly, I don't think you do. Even as an individual listening experience, it's still incredible, and there's more than enough meat to this album's story that you don't have to feel bad if you don't want to read a 72-page screenplay along with it. If you choose to, more power to you, but I just don't think you necessarily have to. Either way, great album. Really enjoyed it. At number 11, my first full-length experience with this group, and I know that might sound terrible to say, but I'm gonna say it, Paramore's self-titled 2013 album. Yes, I know that it's probably sacrilegious that it took me until this year to finally listen to a Paramore album, but I'm glad I finally got around to it, because this album, again, is fantastic. It's a perfect mixture of power pop and pop rock styles that, even as my first experience with one of the band's albums, I can tell was a huge moment of experimentation for them. There were plenty of memorable singles and hooks on this thing. Hayley Williams is obviously a great vocalist, and even the interludes were good. Top to bottom, this was a really amazing project. And yes, I know I didn't get around to reviewing the group's new album in a proper video. I will have a video where I talk about that, along with a couple other albums that I didn't get to review this year. So stay tuned for that when that eventually comes out. At number 10, another artist who dropped a new album this year that was fantastic. I gotta go with James Blake's Overgrown. James Blake is just such a clever and inventive artist, and this album is every bit as good as his other ones. I love how he juxtaposes beautiful, mellow vocals with dark, reverb-heavy electronic instrumentals and textures. And there are so many creative beat change-ups throughout this album, it's just a great listening experience from top to bottom. I also have to say, as someone who's listened to a lot of his discography up to this point, his collaborations with hip-hop artists pretty much always hit, and the track Take a Fall For Me with RZA is a notable example. This dude just nails it. This is a fantastic album, and James Blake is amazing. He nailed it on this just like he did on his new album that he dropped this year as well. At number 9, one of the bigger pop albums of 2013, and obviously one of the better ones in my opinion, Lorde's Pure Heroin. While it's probably not too wild to see this album here, what is wild is that after 10 years, I finally like Royals. Yes, it really took me that long. In my youth, I didn't really like the song. But yeah, this record's awesome. And as someone who is a sucker for albums that make me want to go sit in the shower and have a good cry, this one gets there. I love how mellow and emotional it is, and especially the way that it discusses getting old. Lorde was really onto something with this album, and it was a very good change of pace from a lot of what was going on in the pop landscape at the time. Melodrama is still my favorite Lorde album, but this is a very close second. It's a fantastic record, a huge change of pace for popular music at the time, like I said, and it still sounds amazing today. Speaking of albums that were huge sea changes in 2013, number 8 on my list is the self-titled Beyonce 2013 album. One of the biggest musical moments of the year at the tail end of the year, this was huge for the landscape of music and for Beyonce herself. It was sexy, it was fun, it was filled with beautiful vocals, and even though Beyonce had great songs and albums for years before this, it felt like this album right here was a huge moment of her coming into her own. It was her fully claiming her own creative control and artistry with her music in a way that was even greater than before. And what's more, like I said, this was a huge sea change for modern music, as Beyonce's surprise release strategy was pretty unforeseen at the time. And it began a trend that we still see plenty of in the music world today. We have seen tons of surprise released albums in the years since this one, to the point where sometimes it might not be easy to appreciate what this album did because so many others have done what it did. But yeah, it was a pretty big deal back then when Beyonce just randomly decided to hand everyone an album and just say, here. But beyond its incredible impact, this remains a fantastic album all on its own, which isn't surprising for an artist like Beyonce. I mean, she drops plenty of great music, so it shouldn't be a shocker for me to say that this album is still incredibly good. But it is. It's amazing. At number 7, this is where we get to the part where I kind of combine 2 albums into one spot just because they kind of belong together for me. And maybe some might be surprised that I have this high, but I really did enjoy it this much. I gotta go with Justin Timberlake's The 2020 Experience, both parts. Honestly, I was pretty surprised that I enjoyed this set of albums as much as I did. Kinda like Little Mix, but in a bit of a reverse situation. Justin Timberlake's 2018 album Man of the Woods, which was the first album of his that I fully listened to, really clouded my judgment of JT as an artist and made me forget that he once made some fantastic music. Both parts of this album are some slick R&B that's right up my alley, that Justin himself absolutely owns because of course he's a talented vocalist. And I'm also surprised that the song lengths here didn't really impede on my enjoyment of them, because there are a lot of tracks that are pretty damn long on these 2 albums, but they don't get boring or stale or overlong. They still sound great. I know you can criticize JT for a lot of things, but man, this guy knew how to make some fantastic music back in the day. I still personally prefer part 1 of 2 over 2 of 2, but this is still an R&B banger of a 2-album collection thing, and I'm definitely comfortable ranking the two parts together. At number 6, an album I have years of experience with because I reviewed it several years ago, the self-titled debut album from the 1975. Again, it shouldn't be news that this is here because I've reviewed it before and I've mentioned how much I've loved it before, but yeah, the 1975's debut album is still amazing. Matty Healy might be a pretentious twat, and some might not like that he's very self-proclaimed in the fact that he's a pretentious twat, but his band does make some good music. And to my surprise, I enjoyed this album even more in my re-listen than I did when I first heard it back in 2017. A few tracks kind of grew on me a bit. There's just so many infectious blends of pop and rock mixed with catchy hooks and killer vocals from Matty. And again, as if I didn't love so much of the album when I first heard it in 2017, several tracks I enjoyed even more now. I Like It When You Sleep is still my favorite 1975 album, but this is still pretty fantastic and a great debut for this band. At number 5, I know this will be a surprise to some, but I really enjoyed this project. The self-titled debut EP from PARTYNEXTDOOR. Who was gonna tell me P&D's debut EP slapped like this? I mean, call it just me being a huge R&B lover, but yeah, I really enjoyed this thing a lot. Once again though, maybe my surprise just comes from the fact that my only real prior experience with P&D's solo music was with his 2020 album Party Mobile, which was a massive snooze fest that really clouded my judgment on him. Going back to this, I was surprised by how colorful the production was and how much more energetic Party's vocals were. Compared to the very sleepy vibe of Party Mobile, this felt a lot more emotional and a lot more interesting. It's some strong R&B music that's right up my alley, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Suddenly, I'm kind of curious to hear out his other albums as I continue on into this series over the next few years. At number 4, another album I have plenty of experience with, Ariana Grande's debut album, Yours Truly. Obviously, I reviewed this album before, so you know I have some experience with it, but even back in 2013 when I was still in my pop cynic phase, Ariana Grande was a pop artist I quite liked. Even 5 years after reviewing this album and 10 years after its release, it's still a project I really enjoy. Just a lovely pop and R&B album with some great throwback jams, a great showcase of Ariana's talents as a vocalist, and there are a lot of songs I have plenty of memories with from this thing. Baby I, Almost Is Never Enough, Piano, You'll Never Know, Popular Song, you name it. This album had hits, and they were great. I don't know where I'd rank it among Ariana's albums just because I personally love all of her records, but this one would probably be pretty high up there. Maybe that's nostalgia talking, but it's still an album I have plenty of fun with. At number 3, I definitely gotta go with Janelle Monáe's 2013 album, The Electric Lady. Another moment where I want you to stop me if you've heard this before. Janelle Monáe makes amazing albums. Shocker. I mean, personally, before listening to this album, I had heard that 3 times. To me, you can almost never go wrong with an album that throws back to classic funk, soul, and R&B styles, and Janelle is an absolute chameleon when it comes to these sounds. They are an incredible vocalist, of course, and the way they continued to weave the Metropolis narrative into this project was pretty damn incredible too. It is a little strange and maybe a little sad that Janelle never continued with said narrative after this, but that's alright because the music has just been so damn good. Janelle is an insanely talented and amazing artist who consistently drops fantastic music, and that happened again with this project. God bless black music. Where would we be without it? At number 2, an album that I feel weird talking about, especially in the wake of recent events, but I'm going to mention it because I do greatly enjoy the album, even if it is from an artist that I have my qualms with, let's say. Kanye West's Yeezus. It is a shame that Kanye is such a bad person because he's a fantastic artist. Of the Kanye albums that I have heard, which is pretty much everything from Twisted Fantasy on, this is his most sonically audacious and experimental album, but what's more, it really works. It still sounds incredibly unique today, and I can see how much of an influence it's had on many artists coming up today. I mean, you have to know it's pretty influential if earlier this year when Travis Scott dropped Utopia, many people were comparing it to Yeezus. Respect to the fact that Kanye stuck with his guns on the sonic direction here, but fuck his anti-Semitism, dude. God, I've asked for a quiet Kanye album rollout for so long, and yet he continues to do the nonsense that he's doing now. When I wrote this, this was before his most recent tirade. And then he decided to go on another tirade and now apparently compare himself to Hitler? Alright, let's get off Kanye. I need a pick-me-up, and the number 1 album, my favorite album of 2013, is most certainly going to be a pick-me-up. An album that I'm sure many of you will probably put at your own number 1 spot in 2013, maybe even a favorite album ever for quite a few of you. Sing along with me if you know the words. For my number 1 favorite album of 2013, I am going to go with Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. Every time I went back to this album in any way, or went back to even just a song from it, even if it was just a little tiny portion of a song, I fell in love with it all over again. Daft Punk was really on something with this thing. They were really onto something, and they made some magic with this project. This record is unbelievable. Sonically and aesthetically, it's beautiful, obviously. There's plenty of colorful and energetic dance production, but also some surprisingly emotional moments at several points too. It really feels like it has it all, and there are some excellent guest vocal appearances too, specifically Pharrell's 2 songs. I'd even argue, as iconic as Get Lucky is, I personally think Lose Yourself to Dance might even be a better song. I saw someone say that Daft Punk is the closest we'll ever get to world peace, and I mean, yeah, probably. Absolutely love this album. Probably one of my favorites in general, not just from 2013. Daft Punk is incredible. And as sad as I was, like many others, when they broke up a couple years ago, I now see even more why people were sad when they broke up, because God, these guys are so goddamn good. And this record, I mean, you've probably heard it 50 million times. You probably know it's fantastic. But yeah, it's fantastic. So that was my favorite albums of 2013. I'm sorry if some of those sum-ups felt a little bit short, but just because of the sheer amount of albums I was going to be talking about, I didn't want to keep this going way too long. Especially because now I want to get into some other notable albums that didn't land on my best or worst list. And again, there are plenty here, so if the sum-ups are a little bit short, I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot to cover. So let's not waste any more time, let's jump in. The breakout album from everyone's favorite band that makes music for TV commercials, One Republic. I was surprised by how many hits this group had, especially off this album. Like, other than just Counting Stars, they had some pretty big ones. But sadly, the record proved to be just okay to me, nothing that special, nothing terrible. I still really enjoy the track If I Lose Myself, but the rest of the album was just alright. It's always interesting going back to Tyler, the Creator's old music, especially given the current trajectory his career has taken. Wolf, for example, is not his best, but it's pretty good, and it's a big improvement over Goblin. I think some of the hooks don't really hit for me, but it's kind of as if he took the best parts of Goblin and cleaned them up with some better production and less over-the-top edginess on the lyrics. So ultimately, yeah, works for me. A bit of a hidden gem for me, Kid Cudi's Indica has a lot of the trademark elements of what made him such an appealing artist to me, with some good bits of experimentation here and there as well. It may not hit as hard if you're not already into Kid Cudi's music, but I still enjoyed my time with it, and I was able to pull away enough good from the album. Even though I can acknowledge that yes, Kid Cudi has made better projects than this. You know, for an album called Save Rock and Roll, Fall Out Boy's 2013 album had a lot more pop than what you'd expect. All in all, though, it's fine. I like the singles outside of My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark, and the poppier change of pace does feel genuine, it's just that it doesn't always sound great. A lot of the value of this album for me stems from nostalgia, though for some listeners that might be just enough. I listened to Chance the Rapper's Acid Rap years ago, back when it was reissued on streaming services, so I had some experience with it before this video, even if I never did a proper review of it. And yeah, it's a great project. It's kind of like Chance took what he did on 10 Day as far as his vocal charisma, but this time had stronger production to back him up. It's not my favorite project of Chance's, I still prefer Coloring Book myself, but this is a great tape that still holds up to this day. I get the impression Demi Lovato really wanted to chase radio hits on this album, because there were definitely more than a few moments where I just thought they were going for radio-style songs. It's not a bad album. To me, Heart Attack remains an absolute banger, but it's just kind of okay. Some nice ballads here and there, but I think that Demi definitely has better projects than this. One of the few projects I had to listen to on something other than Spotify since it's not been re-released on streaming services. Travis Scott's Owl Pharaoh is alright. Some good tracks here and there, but, and it shouldn't be surprising to hear me say this about a debut mixtape, it very much sounded like Travis was still trying to find his style and sound here, and it definitely sounded like he was wearing some influences on his sleeve a little too hard. I know people talk about how on Utopia he wore the Yeezus influence a little too hard, but here it felt like he was wearing those influences even harder. He's definitely made better since this, though, I'll say that for sure. The sophomore album from one of the biggest rappers out there today, J. Cole's Born Sinner, is great. It does have some issues here and there, some of the hooks get a little stale, the production can carry at points, and I personally could do without the interludes, but there is a lot to like on this project. J. Cole's obviously a very strong rapper, and that helps a lot of the songs here, and this record also has a few singles like Power Trip and Crooked Smile that are among my favorite songs of his. This is definitely an album I can still recommend. Honestly, I kind of liked this. By JayZ standards, I don't think Magna Carta Holy Grail is amazing or anything. 444 is obviously way better, but it's decent. For a record that sees JayZ jumping on some more modern sounds and styles, I think he could have done it a lot worse than what he did here. And I also had a bit of a whoa moment when Nas showed up. It does kind of crap out a bit in the second half and kind of decreases in quality, but it's still solid enough. No disrespect meant to Selena Gomez here, but Stars Dance makes me glad we're out of this era of music. It's not the worst thing that I've heard from 2013, but to me it's just not super good. I like Selena's personality, but this album felt like it really lacked any kind of identity. It just felt like it wanted to be another electronic pop record in a landscape of music that was chock full of those. Hell, even Come and Get It didn't really do much for me, despite that being a pretty big single. Ultimately, this album was just very generic. A good Backstreet Boys album in 2013? How did this happen? Oh, what's that? It was their first album after leaving their old label? Okay, it makes sense now. But yeah, just as I was surprised when I reviewed their 2019 album, In a World Like This surprised me too. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it had some fun pop jams with a decent maturation of the band's sound. Hey, I don't know what it is, but I like some Backstreet Boys albums, it would seem, even some of the recent ones. Make of that what you will. I'm largely mentioning this album because I am quite a fan of Kyle's music, and Beautiful Loser was his debut mixtape back in 2013. There were a few good moments on here. I especially like the track Fun, specifically the second part, but most of the record is just kind of forgettable pop rap that has some charm here and there, but doesn't really grab me too much. I think Kyle has definitely done far better since this project. Nice to get his feet wet with, but nothing that I found super memorable. I had to kick my shoes off and get comfortable with this one because I know it's a big favorite for a lot of people in the context of 2013. Quite frankly, I don't think I really knew what to make of Earl Sweatshirt's Doris when I listened to it the first time, and even after giving it multiple listens, I just found it to be not for me for some reason. There are tracks I do like, and Earl Sweatshirt is a talented rapper, but I think this was a bit too much of a slow burn for me. Earl kind of sounded bored at times, and he got outshined by features here and there too. It's not too bad, it's just not for me, I guess. Albums like this are why I'm very glad I don't do this series as individual videos anymore, because if I did, my opinion on this album would be a lot different, and there's a chance I wouldn't have even done a video on it. The first time I listened to Arctic Monkeys AM, I didn't really get it, and I just thought it was kind of a drag. It was after re-listening that it really clicked with me, and I saw it as a pretty great album. Plenty of snappy riffs, groovy bass lines, very memorable hooks, and even a bit of a cinematic feel as well. It's really good. There are a few weaker tracks here and there, and that does keep it from being an excellent just barely, but all in all, it's still a great record. You guys know that I'm a huge Weeknd fan. Hell, my YouTube channel banner is the Starboy logo, but I've gone on record many times to claim that Kissland is my least favorite Weeknd project. I was interested to see if it would grow on me at all when going back to it for this series, considering that the trilogy really grew on me, and ultimately it grew on me a touch, but it's still my least favorite of his albums. There are moments of genius, yes, but a lot of the songs lack compelling hooks and feel like they meander a little too long. Hot take, but I think his 2018 EP My Dear Melancholy did what this was trying to do, but way better, and a lot shorter at that. Honestly, it was pretty interesting how Avicii was blending styles of country and bluegrass in with the usual EDM style on True, but unfortunately, it just did very little for me. I will say though that Wake Me Up is still a classic, and as someone who does get a bit annoyed by EDM, this was much more tasteful and enjoyable than some of the other stuff that I hear that pops up in this style. So I can say that fans of the genre will probably enjoy this way more than I did. Also, of course, R.I.P. Avicii, another artist who was taken from this world far too young. I've listened to Nothing Was the Same too many times at this point, and I've talked about it on here in my Drake discography dive video I did earlier this year, so I don't have to go super deep into my thoughts here. Ultimately, I stand by my opinion that it's just okay, and honestly, I think it actually has some things in common with The Weeknd's Kissland. Toronto really does stick together, huh? But no, I feel like the common ground with them is that I enjoy both of them in parts, but not as much of it I can enjoy fully. Like, there are songs I enjoy pieces of, but not all of. And like Abel, I think Drake has done a project that I feel like did what this was trying to do, but a lot better, and that was If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. This is definitely still better than most of his new stuff, but that's not really difficult to do. While I wouldn't call this Pusha T's best work by any stretch, My Name Is My Name is still a good record. It does get occasionally bogged down by some odd production choices and unfitting collaborations. Much as I love Kelly Rowland, it really should have been anyone other than Pusha T on that track with her. But Push's confident performances and songwriting make this album work for me. Also, Nostalgia is truly a classic. Not that that needed to be repeated, just saying. I went into bangers fully ready to defend Miley Cyrus, but then I remembered I hated her sound during this era. This was the I'm gonna work with Mike Will Made It and try to make hip-hop era. A time that I think really was not great because the sound did not fit her super well. A solid second half barely drags this album into okay territory, but the lows were pretty bad. I also find this album to sound like defiance for the sake of defiance at times, and I think Wrecking Ball and We Can't Stop, the two big singles from it, are kind of awkward to return to today. It shouldn't be a surprise that I, someone who's not too into Katy Perry, didn't find a whole lot to enjoy in Katy's 2013 album, Prism. It's not bad, but it's just kind of alright. It kind of sounds like she just wanted to make something more mature but still chase radio hits, so there was a bit of a disconnect at points. And it also made some tracks feel a bit awkward, like Roar, for example. Though I do like Dark Horse, but otherwise, yeah, this didn't really turn me into a Katy Perry fan. Yet another self-titled album in 2013, Avril Lavigne's record, was pretty good. It was like she was mixing her pop and rock sounds a little bit, though leaning closer into the pop style, but doing so in a way that still felt very her. There were definitely some lows for me. The song with Marilyn Manson was bad, Hello Kitty was terrible, and her cover of Nickelback's How You Remind Me, yeah. But it's still a fun and pretty youthful record. Here's to never growing up indeed, Avril. I hate to take the Queen's name in vain, but unfortunately Lady Gaga's art pop was just okay to me. Creative and eccentric as it is, this kind of electro pop that the album goes for is a bit too abrasive on my ears, and some of the hooks really fell flat for me. There were some big highlights, like Applause, which I think is a great track, but otherwise, Did One Direction finally impress me with an album? Yes, actually. Midnight Memories was not amazing, but it was a pretty enjoyable listen. Compared to the group's first two albums, it felt like Psycho Music finally let them, be a band and actually have, like, a bit of creative freedom. It was nice that there was a decent bit of restraint to the production too, some cleaner pop sounds with decent rock moments, and there are some good singles too. Best Song Ever and Story of My Life are quite good. Yeah, it's not the greatest thing I've ever heard, but it's a decent little album. And finally, I was very curious to check out Justin Bieber's Journals, as despite it being one of his least commercially successful albums, I've heard many call it one of his best works. And yeah, I'd honestly agree. To me, R&B Bieber is the best Bieber, and given that this is pretty much a pure R&B album, it's a strong set of songs. There are a few misses here and there, but ultimately a lot of great stuff too. Way better R&B album than Changes, even though Justin really tried to convince us that Yummy was an R&B song. Yeah, okay. But yeah, this is great. Definitely one of Bieber's better records, even if it came at the height of one of his worst eras. So yeah, that was 2013 as far as the musical albums that we got, and man, what a great year it was. A lot of stuff that I'm going to be coming back to a lot. I don't expect 2014 to be quite as strong. Just looking at some of the albums that I had on my list, it doesn't seem quite as exciting or nearly as packed. I think there are a lot less albums that I'm going to be looking at, both as far as quality but also quantity. But all in all, yeah, 2013 was a fun year to revisit as far as the albums that were coming out back then. Even if it did get very busy at points, like in September when I had to look at 11 different albums. Yeah. That was a lot. But all in all, yeah, I still had fun going back to the albums from 2013, and yeah, obviously this version of the video, as opposed to the individual videos, is a lot more fun. Even if, and you won't see this, but the raw footage on my camera is over an hour at this point. I've really been filming for over an hour, and I have another video to do after this. Well, I'm back. This is what I get for being away for so long, isn't it? Right as I said I wanted to do shorter long-form videos, not anything nearly as long as that discography dive or that Smash Ultimate soundtrack review. Either way, what are some 2013 albums that you loved or hated or felt indifferent toward, or some other big albums that maybe I didn't talk about? These are all just my opinions, so what are your opinions? Whatever your thoughts, experiences, and opinions are, whatever you want to tell me about 2013, the year it was for you, the kind of music you were enjoying, the albums from that year that you loved or didn't love, or what have you, Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. Of course, it's no big deal. I totally understand if you don't want to. I appreciate you coming to check out this video anyway. And yeah, like I said, I have another video that I'm going to be doing after this. I do need to take a minute to charge my camera and recharge my energy. But yeah, I got some fun end of year videos coming, so hopefully you guys will stay tuned for those. I will try to get them out as quickly as I can without compromising the quality of them. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. And because I wasn't reviewing albums, I wasn't listening to albums, because I didn't start listening until I was reviewing them back in Damn it! No, try that again.